Hi, I have a meeting with Emery Fung. Ran. Oh yeah. This is a shared office.
How are you?
Emery, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. How are you?
Great.
Just give me 2 seconds and I'm just gonna get my stuff and then.
Sure.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
Yeah, photography. I think I've always had a weird relationship with it. I think I never liked the way I looked when I was younger, before I transitioned. So I think taking photos and things like that was not my favorite thing to do, especially as a child, even growing up as teenager. But as I kind of became a bit more confident in my own body, in my own skin, that really changed a lot. I still wouldn't say I'm the first one to be like, oh, let's take a photo here, wherever I go for holidays and whatnot, but at least I'm not as reluctant to it. And it's actually really nice sometimes to actually look back and kind of just capture the moment. Sometimes how, we take loads of photos all the time, but we never actually remember sometimes the moments that we capture. But sometimes being there in the moment is good, but also actually having that option to go back and revisit that feeling and that moment is also quite a nice feeling, which I never really considered that part of photos before. But now I'm kind of getting that feeling, and it's just a nice kind of reminder of sometimes when you're too busy, especially living in Hong Kong, you can just flick back and then look at kind of what you experienced and what kind of how you felt at the time and what you looked like at the time, what was that moment you were going through. So it's very interesting, but it took me a while to really kind of get to this space with being kind of okay taking photos and things like that.
So, first of all, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I love how everybody answers that question slightly differently, and because everybody has a different relationship to ultimately how we see ourselves, I guess, but also how other people photograph us, how we photograph. So this is a very personal, the podcast is a very personal journey for myself, in which I go to people and I say, well, how do you make, if life is a gift, how do we make every second count, right? And each person kind of gets to that. And so just personally, what brought me to us here. So why don't you describe where we're seated right now? Right now, your view is, I'm very sorry, your view is just me. So that's my view. So why don't you share with people where we are so they have a feeling of
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. We are at the moment in probably one of the busiest spots in Hong Kong.
Arguably in the world?
Arguably, yeah, probably as well, yeah, Causeway Bay. Really, we probably right now exactly where we are is probably at the quieter end of the Causeway Bay at large, but still pretty busy as soon as you get downstairs from the elevator, it's just people everywhere. I come out here, I have a co-working space here, I come out here a couple of days a week sometimes, and if you look out the window, it's just buildings everywhere, concrete, and people.
We're on the 15th floor. It's sunny outside. This episode will be, I haven't recorded an episode in about, probably 6 weeks, because I've been moving, traveling around. It's been really intense. And so for me, I'm no longer jet lagged, but I'm looking out the window, and I think until people come to Hong Kong and see the density of, so you've been in other cities, we don't see cityscapes like this. So right behind you is one tower. Down below is another tower, maybe 10 floors. And then behind that, really much more modern looking towers of, say, 20 floors. And behind that, 60 floors. It's just it's mind blowing. And so thank you so much for meeting me here, for being on my show, and let's make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for coming out all this way. I know you're based somewhere slightly different compared to the buildings here.
Yeah, no, this is fine. So let's look at the first photo.
Yeah.
Here's what's great. I never looked at the photos
before. And I love that, actually.
Yeah, so I'm just so what is this? Okay, so you're taking me on a journey. Okay, photographed outside on with a professional photo lens, probably a good telephoto lens. Depth of field isn't very long. Is that you?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks like you. Yeah. So you're basically mid you're wearing a soccer jersey, number 25. Is that your lucky number?
No, it's not. It's not my first choice, but the numbers rang out on the team.
Okay, fair enough. You're wearing it's like a team jersey.
Yeah,
it's like navy blue with white. I love it's mid action. We're just about to kick the football, the soccer ball. Is this in Causeway Bay?
Happy Valley.
Happy Valley, very nice. Is that real grass or is that fake?
AstroTurf.
AstroTurf. Okay. You're obviously part of a league. What is the executive? Is that just the sponsor?
Yeah, so that's a sponsor. So I play football at the football club, which is right next door to where we are right now.
Okay.
At Happy Valley. And I mean, the reason why I had this photo is that sport is just a big part of my life.
Nice.
I always have been. One of those kids where I played every sport available in school.
Nice.
But football was always kind of like the main one that I always kind of stuck to. I watched football. So at the moment we train twice a week and we play a game of the weekend. When I finish training or when I finish game, go straight on to my phone and check the scores on the actual, the real Premier League in the UK, and look at, all sorts of news and stuff. So my life is quite evolved around football.
I have to interrupt. Where did you grow up?
Hong Kong, but then I went to school in the UK.
Okay.
Yeah,
so where did the seed for football, aka soccer, get stuck in your head?
Interesting. Actually, a good question that you asked that, because both Hong Kong and UK reasons. So I was born here, but I left for boarding school when I was quite young. So I left when I was 9.
Holy shit. Wait.
Yep, I was 9. Yeah.
9 years old, sent to boarding school.
Yes, yeah. I mean, people from Hong Kong go to boarding school. It's quite a common thing, but not as early as 9. A lot of them go secondary school, I think, usually.
Wow.
The reason being is that my dad works in civil servant, so we had subsidies to go to school in the UK, so which is why it's also quite common for people from Hong Kong who takes that subsidized fees. Yeah, so I went when I was 9. So the school holidays in the UK are much longer.
Yep.
So whenever I come back for Hong Kong for holidays for Christmas or whatever it may be, I actually had the leeway to stay up late to watch games. Okay. Because I wouldn't have school the next day.
Right.
And my dad works shift hours as well. So we actually used to watch a lot of games at night time. Usually I think it's either midnight or like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. So like a normal kid would not have that kind of like, So by kind of luck or by crook that, I was able to actually catch those games. So really started off watching it with my dad. And then it just kind of, I play football the weekends and then during school and PE lessons, and then it just carried on being a thing.
Okay. So in this particular shot, I mean, I think I found you because Regina Larco, who was on the podcast, has some fantastic podcast or movement impact. And then I think you were on her, you spoke on her podcast. And then I was also looking for people who were TED speakers, right? And so that's when I reached out. So I reach out to you, maybe it's stupid, I never research my guests. Okay. Not because, maybe because I'm lazy, but also because I love the idea of...
You want it to be like more genuine and more kind of on the spot, right?
Discover, you know, it's like... So you choose this photo to play, where you play football. You're committed. You love the game. You've been playing ever since you were a kid.
Yeah.
So how far up did you get in your league playing?
Football, I was never really got that far because the school I went to, funnily enough, did not offer football.
Yeah, blame the school.
So what I played instead was actually hockey. So field hockey was also... I don't know how much you know about sport, but field hockey and football, the principles of how the game is played is very similar. How the formations and kind of just the general kind of ideas very, very similar. So when I first went to the UK, hockey is a very big sport in the UK, school-wise as well. So at first they were like, you kick a ball, so why don't you be in goal? So I got padded up.
Okay.
Being, you can see how tall I am, not the tallest person in the world. And you get padded up. Basically, I was non-existent in the massive goalie kit. And then after a while, they were like, maybe not in goal, too small. So I started playing outfield hockey, field hockey, for those who might assume hockey to be ice hockey. And I played all the way up to West of England level.
Okay.
For hockey, but unfortunately, I couldn't carry on because all the training camps was during the summer, and now I would come back to Hong Kong for holidays.
Right.
So there was always, it was always like a love-hate relationship where I come back to the UK and to Hong Kong, there's always good and bad for both sides. As that's hockey that arguably I think the highest level I did until I was about 16, 17. Then football, I would come home and play football and train with clubs and stuff. And then I was training with the Hong Kong squad when I was about 14, 17, running for like one or two summers. But again, the tournaments was during the school terms. I wouldn't be in this part of the world, so I wasn't able to attend, kind of commit fully in those schedules.
Sure. Well, we share a little bit of convergence. My dad was really big into football, into soccer. He played in Israel. He could have made it to the team. I think got an injury, so he didn't. But because I'm his son, he really kind of pushed me to it.
Well, it lived through you.
Yeah. So, but I grew up in Montreal, Canada. Soccer isn't big, but I made it up pretty high. Like I was the smallest kid in my class till grade 9 or something. So I was a big player of football. So I know the game, played lots. Tried out for the provincial team, but then wouldn't go beyond that. But I also played, and I love playing hockey, like ice hockey. So I'm Canadian.
Yep.
So hockey, love hockey. So also big into sports.
Yeah.
So,
I've always thought I want to try ice hockey, but it's just a little bit harder kind of in the UK and in Hong Kong.
Sure.
It's not as easy to get to. But I heard there's actually a community in Hong Kong, right, for ice hockey, for Megabox,
I will need to kind of get back into it. It's a happy place for me, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So is this it looks like a professional photo.
So, I have to say that the community in Hong Kong, I think people would not see Hong Kong as like a big sports community, right? On the face of it, right?
People don't know.
If you're not in it, you don't really know the scale. And it's not the first thing you associate Hong Kong with.
Sure.
But there's actually a huge community, and the photos being taken, it looks professional. Is actually people who just volunteer in their spare time. They just come to our games free of charge. They don't ask for anything. They just take photos for us, and then they upload it to like a drive.
Cool. That's cool.
They have their own Instagram. So like it's like a really nice community where people just kind of show up.
It's a great shot.
And do their own thing, and yeah. I have to say that's the only one photo that actually my face is actually like normal looking. The other ones are like your eyes are like half blinking or something.
Yeah. No, for sure. For that kind of photography though, because I've done a bunch of photography, you have to shoot a lot because you just need tons and tons of shots, and you finally get the one where the person's expression isn't weird. Yeah. So that's great. Emery Fung. Let's move on to the next photo. Look at that photo. Okay. Look at that photo. Yeah. Okay, first of all, great photo of you. Okay, it looks like it's made by your web camera.
Wow, you really know your camera, don't you?
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, it's also the perspective. So you're sitting in front of a mic. You're wearing a nice navy blue polo shirt. You're sitting, I'm assuming, in your room. You've got earphones in your ears. You're smiling at the camera. You got the mic in front of your face. On the wall, there's a red jersey with a number 9, red and white.
Arsenal.
Okay, nice, very nice. And then you've got is that your illustration of the
podcast? Yeah, of the podcast that I have.
So you have a podcast.
Yes, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
So this is a shot of you doing
basically being you.
Okay, promote it, man. What is this?
Yeah, so I've got a podcast called Awkward at Work.
Okay, hold on. You have to articulate, and the link is going to be in the show notes. But what is it again?
Yeah, so it's called Awkward at Work.
Okay.
And the reason why it came, or how I was inspired by it, really, I think a lot of people might be able to relate to this. That it was COVID, so I wanted to do something that was slightly different.
Yep.
I had a lot of time on my hand, and it was also a time where I was really not happy with where I was working.
Okay.
But I've always loved working. I started working when I was quite young, part-time, 14, 15. So I always kind of like the idea of going to work and stuff like that. So it's not like I just don't enjoy kind of work in general. But it was something about the job or I guess with COVID and things, it was a sales job as well. So a lot of, I guess your mental health or the way you see things will always be associated to your revenue number.
Dude, I
And
understand
it just was
you.
not healthy.
I hear you.
Yeah. So that was like, okay, so why is that? And I want to kind of explore, what are the other options out there?
Now, because your accent is very strong, you said like a very strong French accent.
No, UK, yeah.
I'm just kidding. It's being stupid. Okay, so, and it's awkward.
Awkward turtle.
Awkward turtle.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a Canadian.
Yeah.
Awkward turtle. Okay, awkward turtle. Okay.
Yeah.
What?
And yeah,
Keep going.
yeah, basically, yeah, so I do recruitment as my day job.
Oh.
And basically what I do day in, day out is hearing stories of why people don't like their job.
Okay.
Why they want to leave,
Right.
why they think they want to leave.
Okay.
They want a better title, better salary, whatever it may be. But ultimately, if you really ask more questions and dig a bit deeper, it's because they're just not satisfied with what they think, the role, or it's just not what they want. But they think they want a bigger title or bigger salary.
Right.
And so I kind of had that in the back of my mind, and me going through kind of, I guess, a similar thing of not being happy in my work. So I went out there and interviewed a bunch of people who took different career paths, who typically left like a corporate job to do something quite different, quite left field, quite exciting, or something that's people that don't really think about, to figure out, why they make that jump. And how's that been so far? Is it as good as exciting as it sounds? Or is it a different world? And so that was kind of my start of like, I guess, putting myself out there, doing podcasts, learning all sort of skill sets from it as well.
How many, so it's still going on?
At the moment, I've not recording for a while, because I'm starting, kind of other projects in the moment, but I will be resuming in about a month or two. So I think maybe, depends on when this comes out, maybe it'll be back up and running.
Oh, awesome.
By that time, yeah.
Fantastic. And your guests tend to be in Hong Kong?
Tend to be, but I haven't limited. So I've done virtual as well, all over the world, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. So let's talk about recruitment. Like as a role, as a job, as a thing. Sure enough, you're sitting there listening to people's stories, people coming to you because something changed and something happened and they want to change or because they have to change. Like either because they lost their work or because they're there and they're just frustrated and they want to.
Yeah.
How much of that role is you listening to people whining and complaining versus being like a counselor almost?
Yeah.
So talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's my personal view on kind of what that is. I don't know if every other recruiter feels the same way. Kind of so the classic thing that we always ask about when people come for interview as a candidate, what's your experience? What were you doing in your last role? And the biggest thing that we always ask for is real reason for leaving.
Right.
That usually gives us a lot of information about, their motivation to move. Is that candidate, for example, is just searching around, browsing, or are they really serious about getting a new job, or how urgent it is? So then we know how do we kind of respond to that and react to that, essentially. And I've always found that really interesting, because what I've done or what I've encountered before is that, let's say I've met someone brand new and then they said, yes, I want to move for a bigger title, for a bigger salary. And then they ultimately moved, and I'll meet them again a year later, and they say the same thing again.
They're still miserable. Yeah.
And then the same thing and same thing again. So I was like, well, maybe it's really not about the money or the title then, maybe it's about something else. So I've always found that part of the job quite interesting.
Okay.
And apart from the candidate side, we also hear from the client side of why people leave.
Yeah.
The manager always be like, oh, they're just not good enough, they're too lazy or whatever it may be, but it might be because the culture of the company or whatever it may be. So I've always found that's kind of, I guess, a soft side or the mental side or kind of the culture side of the role really interesting.
So what did you study in university?
I did sports management.
What management?
Sports management.
Of course, sports
management.
Yeah, okay,
my parents told me you'll never get a job in Hong Kong. I was like, I'm gonna go ahead and do this degree. I'm gonna find something to do. They were right. I couldn't find anything. I mean, there was, but it wasn't anything that I found exciting. It was maybe a lot more kind of back end and admin kind of role.
So what was the first when you first found yourself in recruitment? What brought you to that?
It was probably the most randomest thing, but which I've now come to learn most people who work in recruitment also kind of somehow fall into it. So I came back to Hong Kong, finished studying, got my degree, and then came back and then just job hunting. Wasn't really sports management was on my mind, but again, I spent maybe 2 months and then it wasn't really going anywhere. And then a friend of a friend who was working at the company that I ended up working at said, I mean, you're quite good with people. You quite like talking to people, chatting to people and meeting people. Have you thought about doing a role like recruitment?
Right.
Did not know what it was, have no idea what it meant.
Yeah.
And I worked as a part-time that belonged to a recruitment agency. So I had an idea of what that meant, but I don't know what it was like to be on the other side.
Right.
So I just went in, did a bit of research, and I was like, give it a go. And the first couple of interviews, I think the hiring manager kept questioning me on why we should hire you.
Yeah.
You've done nothing like this before. And something about me was just like, the more you tell me I can't do it, the more I'm going to be like, I want to do it.
Got it.
So really that was kind of the trigger point of me really going for recruitment. So I've been in recruitment and still am. Been about 8 years now.
Okay. What was the most sort of, if I say to you, just a memory of something that was really like, this is just bonkers. This is just a weird story. This is just like, because recruitment, so one of the, like being in Hong Kong, which moves and changes so much, I've brushed with some founders of big companies, some of them recruitment companies. And like one of the guys is, he came to Hong Kong with $500 in his sock. He ended up starting a recruitment company, and then he ended up having the penthouse of the Princess Building.
Wow.
So, right? So, do you have a story that is just, when there is somebody not from Hong Kong would be like, now that's pretty insane?
I mean, for me, it was kind of a really good entry 101 back into the Hong Kong kind of city. Because bear in mind, I obviously was born here, but I never really lived here properly for like a long period of time. I don't really know what goes on here. So it was actually quite a nice way to be like, okay, this is what the industries, these are the top companies in this industries. This is what a HR looks like. This is what a marketing department looks like. So it was like a really eye-opening thing for me to be in Hong Kong. But I guess a funny thing from my perspective was that when I first came back, got a job, started going to client meetings and stuff, and looking like Chinese, and I speak Cantonese fluently, and obviously, but I didn't know where any of the buildings were.
Right.
My parents live in Ma On Shan, so I've never been to Central until I was maybe like 17 to 18.
Nice.
Never saw the tram in Causeway Bay until I was an adult. So I found everything to be just like, what is this? And then I was going to a meeting, and then they were like, the colleague was like, oh yeah, I'll meet you by HSBC in Central. And I was like, I have no idea what that is. And then they were like, what do you mean? Like you're from here, right? So it was like a really, I guess, a funny way to be back in Hong Kong and kind of navigating my way around kind of what Hong Kong looks like and how to get to places and going to all these fancy offices.
Oh, for sure.
In Central. And the industry I first started kind of specializing was very much the law firms, the finances, services, the iBanks. So seeing those offices in the heart of Hong Kong was like just mind blowing.
For sure.
And it's really like what you see in movies sometimes.
Yeah. Exactly. Like how I can connect to that is that I'd go into these law firms in the IFC on the whatever,
65th floor. Whatever,
and you look out the window and you're just like, first of all, you're 600 or whatever it is, like however 100 meters up in the air, looking over this incredible harbor with and you're just like, how did I get here?
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. Okay, so let's go back to the photo. You have this big, beautiful smile. What prompted you to make? Because it looks genuine. So it looks like a genuine, candid shot. So, but did you stage it to photograph yourself?
I think I was about to do an interview, and I think I was just prepping, and then I was asked to send them a photo of me doing a podcast, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll just put something. I'll just put the camera on, and then just took a few shots.
Okay,
and then that was that.
Nice. It looks it's great. Why turtles? What's with the turtle?
I don't know. So it's like more of a personal thing.
Clearly.
So turtle, really, I really resonate with turtle.
Okay.
A really weird thing of mine. I think I've always been told that I'm a bit more mature than my age.
Okay.
And I just love how they're just so chilled.
Okay.
Like, they just look like they know everything.
You're a bit of a weirdo, man. Like,
I am.
So the thing is, as I'm looking at this photo, just to describe it more to the listener, it's like, you're in a kind of the lighting of the room suggests that there's like a nice large window on your left. And so it's diffused light coming in. It's all whites and there's slight geometric. The only color really is the red jersey on the wall and then your blue shirt. And behind is this, it looks like a color pencil or marker of this turtle kind of like looking at the camera with a smile on its back, just kind of. Okay, so let's if everything's a symbol, right? How is this symbolic? Like somebody who's going to decode this like symbolic creation.
I think what you said earlier is not much going on there. It's simple. I'm one of those people who cleans up my flat every year.
Okay.
Actually, maybe every 6 months, I like to just go around and be like, have not used this for a while, chuck it out, or like get rid of it. So most things I'm just quite minimalistic, simple, not too flashy. And just little simple things that, my flat is pretty boring, I guess. Now I'm kind of picturing my flat. Yeah, you're right. It's all white, and there's not much decoration, and it's just my bed.
Minimalist. It's minimalist. You don't live in a prison. Like it's obviously. What floor do you live on?
19.
There, you see, that's a Hong Kong thing. Like when you tell people, like when my wife and I moved to Hong Kong, our second apartment was on the 51st floor.
Wow, yeah.
Which is like,
insane for a lot of people, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like 51st floor.
Do you know what? This is the highest floor I've lived in. Oh. My parents, they've lived in the second floor.
Okay.
Moved once, lived on the fourth floor.
Okay.
So this is like the longest. Now I'm like getting used to the elevator, the lift going taking longer than 3 seconds to get out.
Got it. Okay. Emery, let's move on.
Mm-hmm.
I love the juxtaposition. I think this image is something I've seen before. Okay. Maybe not. I don't know if this is published before, like maybe through
It would have been somewhere, yeah.
Okay. So it's an image of you standing on a stage. I don't really understand. So you're standing and there's a background. There's some behind you. First of all, there's a stage light on you.
Yeah.
You're looking to your right with a clicker, with a screen clicker, slide clicker. There's this weird sort of backing behind you, background. In the front, in the sort of foreground of the image, there's this big X with a neon sort of, it's like a red X with some bluish neon. There's some weird lighting on the stage. There's maybe some lighting in the background. This I'm assuming this is a TEDx exactly, shot, and take it away. Yeah,
that was my TEDx talk, which was just a mind-blowing thing to have done, or to even be asked to do it. I think when I got asked to do it, I was like, this is not a real thing. I'm like, this is, come on, like, who are these people?
Yeah.
And then, when I got first approached, and I was like, I guess I will have a call and just find out what you want from me or why you want me to do it. And then it just went from there. But it was just the most interesting experience. So, bit of context. Before that, I started a podcast, right? And that was all in the midst of COVID. And since the podcast, and I've done some speaking stuff for corporates and panels and whatnot. So speaking wise is I've done a few, but I've never actually done anything in person or on stage because of COVID. And then that was the first thing I've done.
Really?
Public speaking on stage was TEDx.
What a nice feather in your cap.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, so I guess it was like walking into it naively, like not really knowing what to expect.
Okay.
In that sense.
Okay.
And luckily that it was still COVID, peak COVID in Hong Kong, so they only had half the capacity in the room of the lecture hall.
Okay.
And then they live streamed for people who couldn't obviously to make it in person. So it was not as daunting as what I would normally see on YouTube.
Okay.
So that gave me a little bit of a calmer, be like, okay, it's not that many people.
Scale of 1 to 10 in terms of your nerves.
I was probably the most nervous out of all the speakers.
What?
There was about, I think there was about 5 or 6 speakers. I was second last.
Okay.
I remember the people who organised TEDx said, you can have a choice. You can either sit in the audience and listen, or you can wait in the room. Up to you. everyone else would watch everyone else. I was like, no, thank you. I do not want to know how everyone goes. I will just sit quietly by myself. So I was sitting in the backstage with like all the boxes and all the crazy stuff goes on in the backstage, and I just kept going. I just kept walking around the room.
Wow. Yeah, just
stretching.
Yeah. Work
doing
off that energy.
all that kind of stuff, and I don't think I've ever actually talked about this publicly. I actually brought a hip flask with me.
Okay.
And I had a shot of whiskey before I went up.
A lot of people do that.
Yeah.
A lot of people do that. Okay. Especially it's your first big public speaking event. What was the title of your talk?
Oh God. It would be something along the lines, best kept secret in life.
Okay.
So the talk was about my transition.
Use the word before transition.
Yeah.
Transition?
Yes, I was born female.
Okay.
Transgender. So trans man, I guess a technical
Got
term.
it. Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why they approached me to talk about these things.
Okay.
I think especially in Hong Kong, in Asia in general, there's not that many people who are, I guess, okay to talk about this so publicly.
Right now, again, because I'm an idiot who doesn't research, there are fireworks going on in my head in the sense of I'm like, okay, yeah, right. And then thinking because being in Hong Kong, okay, so in Canada, I worked for the Human Rights Commission.
Okay.
The Ontario Human Rights Commission, which of course was really at the forefront, horizon, whatever, of social change. And also who I am, I've always been open to that, to the idea of culture and moving and evolving and changing and how people and how society deals with these changes.
Yeah.
So then when I meet people like you who are public about telling their story, like we're doing right now, which you've done many times, but also at the TED Talk, the first thing that pops into my head is it takes a bravery and a confidence on top of the fact that this is you speaking for the first time really on the stage.
Yeah.
So if life is a gift and we make every second count, don't let me, I don't want to interrupt because I don't know if you want to take this in another direction, but who are you? Sorry, difficult question.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been I guess, it's funny with this sort of things, I think, for people who, like you said, go out there and publicly talk about their own lived experiences, who are, I guess the word would be, not the most mainstream lifestyle or whatever you want to call it. It's that people always, have these questions about, what's your life like, all that kind of stuff. And because for me, that's always been the case.
It's just you. It's who you are.
I don't find it weird. I don't find it whatever, because that's always something I've had to deal with. But I do obviously understand the questions being asked. But it's like a weird thing is that, I might find something interesting, but that might not be interesting to you.
Right.
But it might be something very, very mundane in my life, but that you might find it super interesting.
Exactly.
For example, going to the doctors, going to pharmacies, getting your meds or whatever.
Right.
Being called, miss when they look at your medical records, and then when you stand up and you don't look the way they expect you to look. Going to interviews, when you walk in the room, not expecting what you look like, or all that kind of encounters, little things that is part of my life, but would be it would kind of make people think a little bit more who may not be so familiar with these kind of situations.
Sure. So, okay, so let's go back to this talk where you're on stage. Is the whole orientation of that talk really about your experience?
Yeah.
And specifically within the Hong Kong context? Like what?
I think a lot of the stuff I based it on was I wanted to make it relatable. Mm-hmm. So a big theme of it was about transitioning.
Okay.
Everyone is transitioning in their own sense.
Yeah.
From a kid to going to school, going to work, paying taxes, and all this stuff. So I make references of how, yes, my type of transition could be quite different, but in reality, it's not that much of a different thing than everybody else would experience. My story is quite unique, but it doesn't mean that, someone else's story that you randomly see on the street, they could have a really interesting story as well.
Oh, for sure.
Just the context of it is slightly different. So I bring a lot of examples how, like, transitioning is actually quite normal thing that everyone goes through.
Yeah.
And it's okay to be not knowing what's happening, or what will happen if what's the next step after you've transitioned, or whatever it may be. And the message of it really is that don't be so close to think this is my path. I must get this degree. I must go to this job. I must have a house by now I'm 30. Must be married. Must be whatever.
I have to live on the 51st floor.
Exactly, yeah. And, by just going along with it and kind of letting go of that kind of what society tells that we have to do this certain thing, this is the blueprint to life, it will create different opportunities for you and take your life in different ways, and which is why I ended up being on stage, being on doing a TED Talk.
So your life just progresses the way it progresses. Was there a formal sort of transition?
So socially, I would say any of my friends, anyone who've known me for a long time, always said I've always been the way I am. I've dressed the way I am.
Yep.
Luckily, I had eczema, really bad eczema when I was a kid. So I never actually had long hair because I used to have it really bad around my neck.
Got it.
So I wasn't one of those, I guess, who went from like 0 to 100.
Right.
It was always being kind of the same growing up.
Got it.
That obviously caused a bit of tension at home, being quite a traditional Cantonese family and things like that. At the same time, I'll be away in boarding school half the time. So I also had kind of the leeway and freedom to kind of be myself when I'm away. So that was always been a case, and people who know me would always kind of know kind of how I identify, even though it wasn't really kind of be like, hey, by the way, this is who I am. It's people just kind of understood. But I guess, there was like a point where when I came out properly at work, because I want to change my name.
Right.
I want to start going on hormones, so my voice would be the thing that would be quite different compared to maybe if you met me a couple of years back.
Sure.
Or, slightly kind of hormonal changes and structure and things like that. But aside from that, from a medical sense, I've always been kind of the way I am, always played football, I've always done all this kind of stuff.
Yep.
But the cut-off point of kind of having to come out at work was really, I guess, the trigger point of the podcast, the TEDx, all that kind of stuff happened afterwards.
Let's go. Okay, so if we rewind the tape, how many years would you say that you moved back to Hong Kong? 8?
8.
10?
8,
years?
yeah.
Okay. So what have you seen in terms of, on a personal level, in terms of the social shift? Has there been a shift? Or it's like, Hong Kong's pretty much been frozen?
I think Hong Kong really does not get enough credit of how people are quite open sometimes.
Sure. No, yeah. Sure.
I think people think about Asia or the East or whatever, they usually think they're a bit more traditional or a bit more closed-minded or all this kind of stuff. But from my experience anyway, I've never had anything that's really kind of violently happened to me or any slurs in Hong Kong. You don't really get anything like that at all in Hong Kong. Of course, you might get people looking at you for a bit longer, but nothing really kind of, as bad as you hear, other parts of the world.
Right.
So in that sense, it's very safe in Hong Kong, being who you are, dressing the way you want to dress and all that kind of stuff. And there's actually the government actually has a clinic for gender, and it's all public funding.
Okay.
So it's actually, the word easy is not the right word, but it is accessible to go through that through public.
Okay.
Because it can be quite expensive.
For sure.
Seeing psychiatrists and all that kind of stuff. So in that sense, Hong Kong actually has started to have some kind of infrastructure that you can go through. So I think that says a lot about kind of where we are from a very macro level.
Right.
Of course, I would say the general understanding of not just trans, just anything, any social issues.
Yeah.
The people are not against it. People are not they don't have any, I would say generally any feeling towards it. They are probably just not actively looking out for new information.
Okay.
Or being, super curious or going out of their way to find out all these things.
Right.
But, if I was to speak to someone and I told them about my story, never had a problem. Sure. No matter how much I don't know them or how distant that person who I met. So in that sense, it's actually been great. And, there's also quite a big community in Hong Kong as well, actually.
Okay.
That again is not as visible because people are not so, let's say, okay with talking about these things openly. But I think that goes back to a lot of mental health as a foundation first.
Yep.
Having their language to talk about things, it's very, culturally, we don't really talk about how your day was with your parents.
Sure.
That's not really a thing that you do. So I think because the foundation of the language is not quite there. or the way we talk. So it makes it harder to talk about the social changes and stuff like that.
I want to not jump in with a sort of like the frame to say, okay, you've just kind of put this within a box so that somebody who's listening says, oh, okay, so this is a trans issue. But what was if you were to compare your experience in the UK and the experience here in terms of your ability to express just who you are, to be you, right? Have you stayed in Hong Kong this whole time, or have you kind of been to different societies or cultures or cities or whatever where different things come up?
So I basically only lived in the UK and Hong Kong. UK, I went to school in Cornwall. I don't know how familiar you are with the UK, but Cornwall basically is the last place people think of when they think of the UK or England.
Okay.
When people say, oh, I went to boarding school in the UK, they think, oh, you went to London or you went to Manchester, the big cities. But Cornwall is about 7 or 8 hours on a coach, 5-6 hours on a train, and it's a very remote area. A lot of my friends who I went to school with were farmers, and that's not a joke, they were actual farmers.
Oh, wow.
So that kind of goes back to as well that when I first went to Central in Hong Kong, I was like, wow, all these skyscrapers and buildings I've never seen in my life. Because I live in Marshan, also the countryside, I guess, of Hong Kong, and then the countryside Cornwall of England.
Yes.
So in that sense, I've always been quite a small community, not like a big city kind of environment. I actually found Hong Kong easier to live in that sense. When it comes to, let's say, LGBT or whatever, in the sense where you would not get any kind of verbal anything in Hong Kong. Whereas the UK, again, I never had really bad experiences, but people would be a bit more vocal.
Sure.
If they want to say something, they would. But in Hong Kong, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to say anything. Right. So that's kind of how I felt compared to UK and Hong Kong.
So, okay. Anything else you want to say about your... because speaking at TEDx was, for some people, or would be for some people, a real big milestone. What would you say was the most positive outcome of that experience?
The most positive was that just the fact that I did something like that at that scale.
Huge.
It's not the official TED, it's a TEDx, but it's still, people will still consider you in that kind of bracket, right? Or in that crowd. Right. Of course, it's nowhere near the most popular ones are Simon Sinek, but it's in that at least I've done something like that publicly. Just being able to say I've done that, understand what it means to speak on a stage, and understand what it means to deliver a message. That sort of thing is all amazing. But I would say the weird thing, or the things that I didn't really think about, was the whole run up to TEDx was like, oh my God, I'm doing this thing, I'm getting myself psyched up. You're preparing every day. That's all you think about for 3-4 months. And then when you finish, and then you're like, oh, it's done. And like, oh, what now? Like, I just go home and sleep. Like, is that like what? So that kind of taught me a lesson where, you should never be too happy or too sad or just too low. But it was a weird thing to kind of, I never even thought about that side of the mental side of doing something like that before. So there was a few days where I was like, oh, what do I do with myself now? Like,
are you really attuned to I'm asking this because I myself have hit this very, very palpably, but are you attuned to your level of dopamine, serotonin levels? Because, for example, because of the meds that I take and because of the experiences I have in the past few months really have observed in myself these huge peaks and huge crashes of ups and downs. And it's just like this idea of leading up to a massive event, this huge rush. And then afterwards you're like, oh, you're just
it's like, what do I do now?
So is that something that you're attuned to, or not really? Or?
I would say I've never even thought about these sort of things before. Only maybe in the last couple of years. Maybe in the last 2, really, to be honest. So I've always thought I've got ADHD. But I've never gone out to get it tested or get it diagnosed. I just done the online test that I've done. They're like, 100%. You've got it. And I've always never thought like, oh, okay, I know, and then there's no next. But because it's kind of I guess the work I do now, which we'll probably move on to a bit later as well, is that I probably need to get myself diagnosed so I know what it means to be ADHD. And,
I guess.
I mean, they are a huge industry that does it. Maybe they've got something to say about it.
Sure.
So I actually got tested or diagnosed 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
And
Congratulations.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's good. It's just good to know.
Yep.
Because, like you kind of mentioned, I find myself sometimes to be really obsessed with one thing, and then I can drop it and then move on to something else, or I get frustrated really easily about certain things, or I just kind of notice that my mood really was being dragged by a lot of external things.
Right.
And I never looked into why. I just never reflected on it. And knowing that I've got ADHD, even though it's only been 2 weeks since I got diagnosed, but I'm like, okay, if I get into a situation, maybe because this is the reason why is this.
Right.
And I can do A, B, C to help the situation.
Got it.
So kind of, I guess I observe it through that way. But I mean, a lot of the stuff, which is why now thinking about it, that's probably why I'm so into sports, because that's where I get my dopamine from.
Sure.
Which now, actually, it makes sense. You can find traces in your life that actually everything matches up.
Right. Okay, because you said everything matches up, let's go on to the next photo. Okay, so this is not a photograph, but it's a very, it's a very nice, plain, simple, minimalist.
Yeah, there's a theme going on, isn't it?
Elegant logo. There's a interlocking, like, speech bubbles. One is in slightly warm gray and the other one it's not foreground or background because they're both kind of interlocked, is in a slightly cooler gray. And underneath, in what looks like a typewriter font style, it says awkward conversations. I love it.
Thank you. So that's the company I've started.
Nice.
Basically, it's a diversity, equity, inclusion consultancy.
Okay.
I mix my recruitment background, knowing what people are when it comes to hiring and talent management, what they're looking for, and have that kind of D&I kind of lens to it. For example, how can you make your company more inclusive? How do you attract more talent and all that kind of stuff. So I basically blend my lived real life experiences to my professional recruitment experience together as my company. And the reason why I call it awkward conversations is because it kind of, the idea came from the podcast, the name of it first, and I wanted to kind of have it side by side.
Yeah.
And I feel like essentially when you talk about social issues or when you want to make change, it's all about having really awkward conversations.
Okay.
Forcing people to have awkward conversations.
Right.
In a sense where I'm talking to, let's say, the founders of the companies or the CEOs of large MNCs about, okay, why haven't you done this? Or why, this is done or,
Yeah.
So that's kind of where the name came from. And, I think it's quite a nice, it gives you I hope it gives you like a idea that conversation can be awkward and awkward is not a bad thing. It's just the way it is.
So, my gut reaction as a marketing wanker, is, there's something really kind of nice about breaking the ice with saying, okay, we're going to have an awkward conversation. It's like, oh, okay. And then it makes people a little bit more receptive, and a little bit, maybe, have you found some people defensive? Or do you feel like once you're in the room, it's like you're having a conversation?
I feel like the name kind of almost, like you said, it gives people the heads up that like we are going to be talking about something that's going to be slightly different to your daily client meetings.
Yep.
For example, I've actually had people or clients who, of course, like, yeah, let me have an awkward conversation with my boss about this.
Okay.
And they've used that as well. And I was like, I didn't even think that, I didn't think that could be like extended in that sense.
Yep.
So that was quite like a fun thing that I hear people talking about it.
Yeah.
And use it in their own kind of, in their own sentences.
So as a marketing branding wanker guy, one of the things I find is that sometimes it's a lot of it can be just timing. So when you come in with this, and that's the kind of the frame that you've put, it's like if the timing is right, people just adopt it because it's like you're relieving a kind of tension in the room. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so would you say that in the business, corporate, whatever, because of COVID, what is the temperature these days around these kinds of conversations?
Yeah. I think it really depends on where you are in the world.
Okay.
Definitely, I think the US probably is seen as the most developed in that sense when it comes to DEI practices, or the word DEI is just a lot more common knowledge, if that makes sense. But at the same time, a lot of it is being accused to be ticking a box. We're just doing it because it looks good and it's good for branding.
Sure.
And for Asia, I think there's actually a huge market and a huge potential to do so, because if you talk about diversity, we're probably one of the most diverse cities in the world. You walk around any street in Hong Kong, you can probably find 10 different nationalities, and people with very, very different, rich background and experiences and living abroad and all that kind of stuff. And there's so many headquarters in Hong Kong as well.
Yeah.
So why, like the money is here, resources, infrastructure, it's all here.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense. And when we talk about diversity, inclusion, all this kind of stuff, I actually, people associate it really easy to the West, because a lot of it is US or UK, Europe driven. But if you really break down the values of what D&I stands for, a lot of it is very Chinese driven. In a sense, it's all about harmony.
Okay.
Living together in harmony.
Sure.
Doing things for the greater good. And kind of looking at things that's more long term. Doing kind of just living in a group together, and that sense of kind of community first rather than individualistic is actually very much a core Chinese value.
Yep.
So I really want to kind of use kind of my background as well, speaking both languages, and bridging that gap, is that actually diversity inclusion is not a weird new buzzword that people have kind of been accustomed to nowadays. Is actually we already know what it is, but we just need to use that in a sense in the workspace, how that looks like, and what can we actually do to create this pathway for people who doesn't get the opportunities usually to get into those MNCs and those headquarters that are based in Hong Kong.
Right. That makes sense to me. So were you taught, I mean, it's part of the background of your family, but in terms of Confucian values, was that taught to you in a very kind of overt sense? Or?
No, actually no. I think it wasn't phrased as such, but later I learned is that, actually a lot of things that I was taught about family values and all these values that, I see as Chinese values has come from that. So it wasn't like, say, per se, this is, but it was kind of a modern version of that. And for myself, even though I was born in Hong Kong, I've got a very traditional, typical Cantonese family, I also adopted the Western culture, the Western values. And I see the good and bad in both sides. And I think, if we were to able to just pick the good ones on either side, then we have the perfect solution.
So this is uniquely Hong Kong. In terms of, for the people who haven't been here, who don't know this, I mean, this really is the amalgam of East and West. So so that because of the tradition of that, of why Hong Kong became what it is as a city. Okay, so let's bring this all together in terms of awkward conversation, in terms of all that. So why don't you talk about what is the next step? Like, why do you think awkward conversations is a thing that Hong Kong really needs?
So the reason why I have it in such simple kind of color and nothing too, out there, apart from personal preference.
Your aesthetic?
And also it's like, I don't love the rainbow washing. Everything has to be loud and colorful and, this. It doesn't have to be that way to advocate for LGBT.
Sure.
So the work that I base on is not just trans, not just LGBT, it's anyone, is what we call intersectionality. So it's basically, you're advocating for all groups, not just one group. Because from what I kind of see and what I feel is that essentially, if you're advocating for disability or LGBT or whatever it may be, the principle of it is the same thing. It's about including them, about making sure they have the access to certain things. So really, the basis of it was all the same. So why don't we stop thinking about this is great for the LGBT people and then this is great for disability? Why don't we just do that all together, lay a really solid foundation, and then if you want it to be a bit more specialized, then you can do like an add-on and go ahead and do that. So that's kind of where I base the work on, and the reason why I think that is a better way to go is because that's what diversity is. Because I said that I'm trans, and I could be ADHD. I could also be disabled. I could also be a different race. So that's kind of how I see it, and that's goes back to the basis of diversity. There's never one solution. There's never just one thing that works. It's always depending on the person, depending on the company,
It's
even
contextually, defined,
exactly.
yeah.
Even though if it's law firms, let's say 5 law firms wants to do the same initiatives, they might need slight tweaks.
Absolutely.
That's going to be fitted to most. And I think, generally speaking, if you look at the macro picture of how the world's going, people want that personalized and that tailor-made version of consumer goods or whatever it is, right? And it's important that we do businesses and tailor-make things that actually make sense for that particular firm, that particular employee groups, that particular location.
Fantastic. Okay, somebody wants to find awkward conversations. Do they look it up online?
Yeah, look it online. LinkedIn is probably where I'm a bit more active.
Yep.
And then the podcast at the moment, I'll put it on pause for the time being, but it should be coming back in a few months' time.
Good.
That's going to be still Todo at work, but it'll have a bit more kind of D&I kind of elements in that as well. So kind of the idea is it will go quite nicely side by side.
Great. Emery, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. This is great. Thank you so much.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.